Welcome to the Running Network Show. Join us each time as we explore the people, the places, and the events that shape our great sport.
We're in Terre Haute, Indiana, with Cheryl Treworgy, who has a number of major roles in the running community. And let's talk a little bit about Cheryl's own career. We know her mostly as Cheryl Bridges, who set the world record in the marathon, and you'll have to tell me the year.
Oh, it was 1971.
That was kind of pre-Title IX, wasn't it?
Absolutely pre-Title IX. Yep.
Cheryl, can you tell us a little bit about your own career and how you really didn't think you were such a great runner, but somehow managed to get our attention?
I think, it was sort of a fluke. I was as vain as any high school girl could be, didn't like my body. And you got to remember this was in the 60s. Jogging was not something people did. All the sports were for men. The only acceptable sports for women were tennis, ice skating, gymnastics, swimming, pretty much. And I just happened to read an article by Bill Bowerman in the Sunday supplement section, and he talked about how he and his wife and friends would go out in the woods and kind of walk and run, and something that we all sort of know as jogging now. But I thought, well, shoot, I can probably do that. So, while I was still on campus at high school, after band practice, I would go out to the track, waiting for the after-school bus to take me home, and try to do a lap longer each night, each week, and just see what would happen. And my body started changing, and I eventually became a runner. And then it was a matter of finding coach, finding opportunities to compete, and finding out that there really was a whole community out there. They weren't locally around my area, but there were people in California. They were it was a club system, and they were scattered all over the country. So you kind of had to get plugged in. You had to know some people in order to find out what the next step was, because people didn't do things for fitness. You had to have a purpose in mind and a goal. So I was sort of a lone ranger out there, doing something that was not necessarily acceptable to people in the 60s. It just it was a foreign concept, really.
Well, you mentioned getting in touch with people, and it was before the days of the internet, when being able to find people is easy. How did you find a coach? How did you find people to train with?
Well, there were the clubs, the AAU club system. Most of it was age groupers, and I happened to be at the top of the ranks when it came to age group, because I didn't start till I was 16. And then we had to travel from the north side of Indianapolis into Indianapolis, and most of the kids were sprinters. And there were, even for the fellas though, that was the club system where they still wanted to compete. Some of them were assistant coaches at high schools and whatnot. But I didn't find women to train with. I trained with men, and by the time I got to college, they didn't cut me any slack either. It was all for one, one for all kind of thing. But we all kind of grew up with this all together. The fellas that were on the team when I was on the team at Indiana State a lot of them became coaches and teachers. So they were almost a step ahead of what was going on in the nation in the late 60s when we graduated, because Title IX didn't come along for another 7 years anyway. And so it was a unique opportunity for they and myself, and it's one of those things that you don't know what's going on down the road with what you're currently involved in. You're just fulfilling an interest and a need at the time. You have no clue that you're part of this whole mission that's going to take over the world, really.
Well, this mission has taken you a lot of interesting places. And how did you first realize that distance was your thing? And how did you start doing marathons?
Well, the reason I was a distance runner is because I couldn't come out of the blocks without falling over. It was just, 2 miles was the longest in cross country. 800 was pretty much the longest on the track. Eventually we got the 1500 or the mile, and I just kept moving up and finding that I was better and better at the longer distances. The marathon came along again on a total lark. I was 23 years old. I had actually written Bill Dellinger because he had been so successful with Steve Prefontaine. I decided if I was going to retire at age 23, I wanted to go out on top. So I wrote Bill Dellinger and asked him if he would coach me by mail. He said yes. I had a great cross-country season, ready to retire, thinking, okay, this is it. Was still in good shape, wanted one more race. Had tried a marathon the year before in 1970, and thought, well, the team's going to go down, I'll go down with them, and see what happens. And I was on world record pace, but a pace is a pace until you hit the finish. And when I got done, it was the best in the world. First time a woman had ever broken 250 in the marathon, and people were interested in the results. The results were through the paper. It was a stamp addressed envelope in order to get results. No internet. Word traveled slowly. It was just a very, very different time, but it gave me a different perspective on what might lie ahead for me as well as other women. And I think it kind of was the first opportunity for women to say, you've only given us permission to run this long, but for those of us that have this urge to try something, we are prepared. We are able to do it, and we have the right to fulfill that dream. So it changed a lot of situations for women about that time.
Which marathon was it?
Culver City Marathon in December of 1971. 2 hours, 49 minutes, 40 seconds. And that actually hung around once we did get the marathon in the Olympics. That the qualifying standard, that was well within the qualifying standard for several Olympics later.
It sure was. And now, of course, people don't think anything about it, but women not only weren't supposed to be able to run long, which we know now they're better at, and they weren't supposed to be able to run, certainly, less than 2 hours and 50 minutes. So that must have been pretty startling.
Well, it was one of those things that, I wasn't doing extreme mileage. I think 60 was the max that I ever did. I think I tried it up to 90 miles, and that wasn't productive for me. But Dellinger had really trained me on the track, and that made me a believer of speed is still important. The intervals were still important. Distance was good for a base, but you still needed to keep up certain aspects of training your muscular system to be able to do certain things. But I think for most women now, they don't realize it wasn't that long ago that we were not allowed to do these kinds of things, and Title IX wasn't that long ago either. And it's really just in one generation, with my daughter and all the other girls that are out there competing. It's hard for them to really understand that it's been a very, very short history.